politics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for our weekend edition of Point of View. I am Penna Dexter, and in studio with me, two of my favorites on a Friday to come in and kind of wrap up the week. Debbie Georgatos is here, and Debbie, in case you don't know her, she's been a frequent co-host on Point of View. A lawyer, she's a political consultant. She has a book called Ladies, Can We Talk? And she also has a radio program of her own, America, Can We Talk? And that's her website. Debbie, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's always fun.
And Jeremy Dyes is here. He's senior counsel for First Liberty Institute, and we love having him on because he's also, I think, got a great radio voice. And another claim to fame that I always have to bring up, Jeremy, when you join us, is the fact that you actually are a second-generation Point of View listener, aren't you?
I am, yeah. Actually, my parents were just in town to celebrate a birthday the other day, and they said, hey, my dad actually said, hey, I drive once in a while. I'm wondering, when's Jeremy going to pop up on a Point of View radio show? But I used to listen to it with my mom, who got me hooked on Point of View back when I was waiting for my sister to get out of that extremely long choir rehearsal after school. We would sit in the school parking lot and eat some snacks and listen to Marlon Maddox and Penna Dexter and Kirby Anderson and the whole lot. So I cut my teeth on Point of View when I was just in elementary school.
Well, we love to hear that because some of it must have soaked in since you're working now in the field of religious liberty. And Jeremy can talk about issues other than that, and that's why he's fun to have on a Friday show. Debbie, you have changed the name of your radio show and your website, and, you know, it was Ladies, Can We Talk, which is the name of your book. And I just can sort of relate with that. You and I have talked about this before, but when I was hired back in the 90s to work with Marlon Maddox on Point of View, I was hired to work on women's issues. And we figured out, I think it was like the second day I was there, I ended up having to sit in to co-host because, you know, somebody was out. And we had Robert Bork on our show. His book was Slouching Toward Gomorrah. Remember it? Okay, so he was the guest. We had him on, and then it just became very apparent that all issues are women's issues, and I'm sure you learned that. Now, I do think that that targeted sort of ministry that you have to ladies, to women, is good because, you know, when I go to events where, you know, the people are sort of apolitical types, friends, neighbors, or whatever, not the people that are in my political circle of friends, it seems like the men know what's going on, and a lot of times the women don't. I mean, it's still a stereotype, and it's not really a stereotype. I think it's still somewhat true in certain circles. And so for you to specifically target to educate women in politics, I think is good. But your issues go well beyond women's issues now.
That's very well said. Exactly right. I wrote the book, Ladies, Can We Talk, really to target women on the subject of voting and to recognize when you're being led along and you're hearing about issues from a perspective of emotion and sympathy. And I think women tend to vote for things because they hear messages from some people in politics that make them, it's emotional, pulls at their heartstrings, but they don't want the outcome they're voting for. So I wrote the book to talk to women about, you know, the best thing for America is to remain squarely, strongly in support of all the rights spelled out in the Constitution, limited government, the Declaration of Independence, to try to lift America up as an idea that we're here to defend. But you're exactly right, Penna, that once you get talking about political issues, all issues are women's issues. And I used to have that mantra on my radio show. And now my other one now is we talk truth about America, try to get really clear about what America is really supposed to be. It's a gift from God for the world. It needs to be held up as a model in the world for how we govern ourselves and how we protect the freedoms of our fellow citizens.
Jeremy, I mean, First Liberty Institute is directed, and really the goal, the reason for being of the organization is to protect religious liberty. And our first freedom, which is religious freedom or freedom of speech, and religious freedom is part of that. And so, that's an idea, as Debbie was talking about, that our country was based on. And now we've got a wacky election out there, and yet I think it's a challenge and really a stewardship of all of us who are believers and conservatives to keep speaking the truth about these things, isn't it?
You said it. Our mission is to protect religious liberty, but not just the issue of religious liberty, but we tag onto there for all Americans. I mean, the idea of protecting religious liberty is one thing. We should have the philosophical discussion on that, and that's important, very important. But even more important is the for all Americans part of that, because it's so part and parcel of who we are as a country. We've paved the way in many respects to religious liberty in the world. And recognizing that, as James Madison did so long ago when he was crafting the Bill of Rights, that it isn't mere toleration. That implies that government gives you something. No, we recognize the free exercise, the unfettered exercise of your religious liberty, because that's what God gave to you at your creation. That's an inalienable right that was given to you by God. And so as a country, it's good for us to have these discussions on how they work out in practice. And we might get to talking about a few of those things later on. We need to remind ourselves of the stories of how people employ their religious liberty so that we understand what freedom looks like.
Well, you've sort of sent me into my next question for you, Jeremy, and that is you also have a radio show. It's a briefing that is actually part of the ministry of First Liberty Institute. And how's it going? It's pretty new, and we're going to air a little bit later one of them.
Good, yeah, no, it's a podcast for those who would like to subscribe at firstliberty.org/briefing. You can subscribe on iTunes and other places. It's called the First Liberty Briefing, and the idea is really just to tell the stories about religious liberty. And there are all kinds of really interesting stories that are out there, and we'll get into a few of those later on, but it's to remind us of what the importance is of this thing we call religious liberty, that when we stand for religious liberty, we gain something, and when we don't, we lose something as a country. And the good news is that it's only 90 seconds long. So the dentist tells you to brush your teeth for 90 seconds. Turn me on when you start brushing, and then you can just stop brushing when I'm done with the whole podcast.
Wow, that's a challenge. To get all of it into a short, especially when you're used to Debbie doing a long-form radio show. It's a challenge to get it into a minute and a half.
Hey, I'm an attorney. I bill by the hour. Imagine how hard it was for me.
Exactly right. It is very hard to get important ideas. And when you think about religious freedom or other issues a lot, there are always connections in your thought. You have one point, but that really does relate to another thing, and that's how things get too long on radio, and certainly on podcasts they could if you don't discipline yourself to one point. Very hard.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, later in the program, we will be taking your calls. The number is 800-351-1212, and what Debbie said was important. Stay at the point. Stay to the point. Sometimes callers end up even going on a little bit longer than we can handle, even though we love the calls. The break comes. And so it's good to sort of discipline your thoughts and figure out the point you're a little bit longer. But we're so glad you're with us today. And we're going to start out the next segment talking about religious liberty, and really especially as it relates to the schools, because school is starting. And so many teachers, administrators, and even students now are intimidated that they don't have religious rights, the freedom of religious expression in their schools, and they should be intimidated because there are groups that actually go after that. But we do have a lot of rights that we don't realize we have, and we ought to exercise them. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll also listen to the 90-second podcast, one of them, that sort of relates to that. Then we're going to get into presidential politics later in the program. How could we not do that on a Friday? And we'll also talk about Donald Trump and immigration. He's had a big week speaking about that issue. All of that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Student debt is a major problem today for the younger generation and has become a significant campaign issue. A recent op-ed by Susan Donarski at the New York Times changed my perspective on the issue of student debt. Let's consider the basic numbers. Politicians often cite two numbers, $1 trillion and $7 million. Student borrowers owe more than $1 trillion. 7 million of these borrowers are in default. So it is tempting to connect these two facts and conclude that more debt leads to more default. That is not the case. It turns out that the biggest borrowers tend to be those that are highest earners. Students with the smallest debts are the ones who actually have a bigger problem paying it back. For example, borrowing is the highest for people who go to graduate school. 40% of new loans go to graduate students, and those who graduate from medical school or law school generally have higher salaries and are therefore able to pay back their student loans. Their percentage of default is much lower than for other students who took out loans for college. Even college students do fairly well in repaying their loans. The typical college graduate earns tens of thousands of dollars more each year than the typical high school graduate. Their default percentage is relatively low as well. The highest percentage of student defaults are concentrated among the millions of students who go to college but drop out before they get a degree. They have smaller debts than many of the other students I've mentioned, but they also have the highest rates of default on student loans. You know, this is a policy application for these numbers. We shouldn't be trying to get all students to borrow less. Those going to graduate school or planning to graduate with a marketable degree are a much lower risk. And this is an important fact to keep in mind when politicians talk about student debt or even propose free tuition. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. It's your Friday weekend edition of Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter, in studio co-hosting Debbie Georgatos and Jeremy Dyes. And I just want to give you a sample, and you will be able to listen to all of these briefings that Jeremy does. They're the First Liberty briefing. But let's just listen to one sample of it, and then that can kind of lead us into this discussion of the religious liberty of those who work and attend public schools. Let's go for it.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dyes. John Rainey was a student at Ward Melville High School on Long Island, New York. He wanted to start a student club that would do acts of service to the community and encourage fellow students in their faith. So he did what the leaders of the chess club, the fishing club, and the frisbee club had done. He applied to form an extracurricular club at the school. But the administrators of his high school denied the application, saying that despite the school having 41 different student clubs, religious clubs were illegal in New York. First Liberty, along with our volunteer attorneys at McDermott, Will, and Emery, sent a demand letter to the school explaining that the Equal Access Act of 1984 required the school to permit John's religious club. The school quickly agreed to support John's club. You would think that would be the end of it, but a year later, when John went to renew his club's application for his senior year, he was denied again. Another demand letter did the trick, and John's club was able to continue doing good for their school and for his community. The Equal Access Act of 1984 says that a school must allow religious clubs at public schools if it offers support to secular extracurricular clubs on campus. Student religious clubs may not be treated differently by public school administrators simply because they are religious in nature. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
That's one of the most recent versions of the First Liberty briefing. And Jeremy, how can people listen to this every day?
Yeah, go to firstliberty.org/briefing, and you can either listen to it right there on the website or go to the iTunes store and search First Liberty Briefing, and you can subscribe to it so it's right there on your phone, your iPad, or whatever iDevice you might have. We're also on Stitcher and a couple other, whatever the other radio plays. Wherever you find a podcast, we're there. Just search First Liberty Briefing, and it can come to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning.
And today, if you want to listen again or share it with someone, you can actually hit that website by going through pointofview.net. Well, Jeremy, school is starting right now, and people are going back to school. It's a really good time to think about our religious liberties at school. And I know one other thing that people can find at the First Liberty website are some facts about what our religious liberties really are. You have a list there of 25 of them, and these are things some of us sort of intuitively knew that we had these rights, but others are a bit surprising. So talk about some of the most important facts about religious rights in public schools.
Well, probably the first and most important fact to point out is that students retain religious liberty when they go onto their own campus, and to a certain degree, so do teachers. It's not that you shed those rights when you walk through the schoolhouse gates, to borrow from the Supreme Court of the United States years and years ago, back in the 1960s. Students retain those rights. And so you have varying degrees of how that right of citizenship is to be exercised. And probably the safest area is where you have students exercising their religious liberty. So if you have a school assignment and it's relevant to talk about your faith, you're entitled to talk about your faith within that. If you want to sit down before your lunch and offer a prayer of thanksgiving for that food, you're entitled to pray over your food for lunch. If you have a club that you want to meet with, and your class or your school has various extracurricular clubs, meaning clubs that are not part of the curriculum of your school, you're entitled to have a club there as well, as you just heard me reference on our briefing here. And there are so many ways that this plays out, but the biggest point that I wanted to draw away, especially if you've got students listening today, or you're listening and you have a student, to remind them, as a student, you have probably the most rights on campus. So if you receive pushback from your campus about doing whatever it might be, and I can tell you stories about what those look like, give us a call. Let us know what's going on. We can advise you pretty quickly. But before that, go to our website, even today, and you can get that at pointofview.net today, but go to firstliberty.org as well and download your religious rights toolkit. Keep it in your folder so you know what's happening. I would wager, as school starts across the country right now, that there are literally hundreds of discussions going on with principals who mean well, but have been told for so many years that there's some sort of separation between church and state. And through a form of ignorance, they just simply are cracking down on religious clubs, perhaps unintentionally. Now, some have bad motives, but I think there are others that just simply are ignorant of what the law is. We would love to educate them, and it doesn't always mean that they're going to get sued. We just want to tell them what the law is and give them a chance to do the right thing.
I love that you're sharing this today, especially because school is starting right now in this time of year. I was going to comment, too, about how if students have or families have the desire to do something, some religious expression at school, and because of there seems to be a lot of media attention on and attacking Christianity, there's a lot of attention on these kind of things that it may seem easier, and you think, well, I don't want to do it at my school. I don't want to be the one who gets questioned. I don't want to be the one the principal says you can't do that. But the thing is about rights is you have to exercise them. And you actually help your community and your school if you want to form the club at school or whatever the activity is, to go ahead and do it, because you really are helping preserve liberty, religious liberty, for the next generation, and you're expanding the universe of people who learn from instances like this, that really religious liberty is firmly intact in schools, and that the school's reaction should be to help and support it and not to squelch it. So it's a really great point for everyone to think about how it's our job to preserve these liberties. And if you don't speak up, you just you'll let the mainstream media picture.
It's kind of like use it or lose it.
Yeah, there you go.
No, I got a great story on that.
That was a pithy way to say it.
I got a great story on that we're actually going to tell on an upcoming episode of the First Liberty Briefing. But I represented a young lady by the name of Liz Laverty in Long Island, New York. And Liz had a desire. She had gone through a rough time in junior high, suffered from some depression, really severe depression, and when she came out of that, because some people ministered to her from her church. She had some real faith getting through that process. And she looked around and saw her classmates struggling with a lot of the same issues. Peer pressure, depression, parents going through rough times. It all affects the kids, right? And so she wanted to do something to care for her fellow students. And so she was going to create a club on campus. And she went to her teacher and said, here's what I want to do. Can I start this club? And the teacher told her that it was illegal to start a Christian club on that campus in Wantagh, New York. Liz and I got connected. We sent a letter, and within a very short period of time, she is able to form that club. But what happened next was actually the interesting part of the story, because people didn't come out of the woodwork to go to the club. It had received literally national attention, issues on Fox News and everything like that. But the kids now were scared to participate in the club,
Wow.
and the teachers were scared that they would be punished by the administration if they helped out with the club. Well, what happens next? Well, she tries to keep the thing going and tries to keep it moving along. The next year comes along. She decides to school at home. Her brother comes in high school. He picks up the club. He saw what his sister had done, what she had gone through, that it was a noble purpose and that she had exercised her rights correctly. And you know what? That club is flourishing today in Wantagh High School because a young man saw what his sister had done to exercise her religious liberty, and they're having a tremendous impact within their own school because, as you said, Debbie, she was willing to exercise her rights in a way that was not going to lose it, but was going to move it forward for the rest of their community. It's a great impact story.
You know, you mentioned teachers and that students have more rights than teachers, but teachers have some rights. Like, for instance, if a teacher were to be the sponsor of the club, you know, a lot of times clubs need a teacher, a faculty sponsor. If a teacher, you have a case, I know about a coach that just prayed. He didn't ask anyone else to pray with him. He's facing problems. You have another case about cheerleaders who put scriptures on banners. I mean, I guess that's not really a teacher issue, but first talk about the teacher.
Well, teachers have the same rights as well. They don't have to cleanse themselves of all religion before they walk through the hallways of their school. In the break room, they're entitled to read their Bible in the break room. They're entitled to have discussions with other teachers about faith, and including, if they'd like to do so, have a Bible study during times when they're not supposed to be working on the job. They're also entitled to talk about religion and when it's appropriate within the class context. We have a rule at First Liberty Institute called the Stupid for Jesus rule, which means that if you're going to do something stupid, but you're going to say we're going to do it because Jesus wants us to, that's still stupid. Stupid for Jesus is still stupid. Don't be stupid. Do the right things and exercise your rights correctly, and things are going to be good for you. But teachers, Joe Kennedy is a great example of that. His job was all done. He's done coaching the game. He walks out to the 50-yard line, takes a knee, and bows in silent prayer. He's got a right to do that as an employee to be able to do that. The fact that they fired the coach for engaging in any public displays of religion means that they, as an employer, are going to face the consequences of their illegal termination of Joe Kennedy.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you can find out, there are 25 rights listed at firstliberty.org. You can go to pointofview.net and just click through to that. Next up, we are going to talk about presidential politics. We cannot get through a Friday show without that. So don't miss it. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
How long have you been listening to Point of View? If this is your first day or two, you get a pass. This one isn't for you. But if you've been around a while, I have a question. Have you ever donated to support what we do? If not, why not? Maybe you really don't know. You never seriously thought about it. Well, please think about it. In fact, take action. Do it now. If you keep coming back, you obviously get something from the program. You've heard how people's lives have been transformed and energized to make a difference. And the only way that we can be here tomorrow and next month and next year is if you break that cycle and give. Please, you can likely do more, but act today and give at least $5. $5. Sure, if you can do 50, do it. If you can do 100, do that. But at least 5. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
We've been talking about our website all day, and we can point you there to pointofview.net to an article that we've put up called "Are There Secret Trump Voters Out There Not Counted by Polls?" It comes from McClatchy. And I thought that would be an interesting thing to not only talk about among the three of us, Jeremy and Debbie, but also to allow callers to weigh in on this issue. And again, the number's 800-351-1212. But this piece talks about Trump and how, in a sense, there are people who will say to you in a conversation, perhaps, that they support Donald Trump, but they might not even answer a poll that way. And they certainly wouldn't put a bumper sticker on their car and all of that. And one of the articles out of this piece says, allies of Trump, who trails Clinton in most polls, argue that there is a secret silent bloc out there that supports him and is not showing up in polls. Pollsters countered that their surveys are accurately measuring support for all the candidates. Either way, there's little doubt that many Trump backers are skittish about going public. And then it tells some stories of some various people who are skittish, that they won't speak publicly about their support. And this one, Dennis Berwin, he's from Raleigh, North Carolina. He's a research analyst. He says he's knocked on 2,000 doors in Wake County there in recent weeks, campaigning for a local candidate. And people invite him into their living rooms. And they quietly assure him they're with Trump. They tell me, he says, that they won't say that publicly. It's because of this environment that's come from the mainstream media. So the media may be part of this intimidation factor. What do you guys think about this? I'll start with you, Debbie. Do you think that could be a possibility? Do you think that these polls could be distorted because of sort of a fear to even admit that you're a Trump supporter?
Yes. If I may elaborate. No, I definitely do.
Please do.
You know what I do think about this? First of all, pollsters can be overconfident. They said Brexit, which was the British exit plan, was going to fail at leaving the European Union, but it succeeded. They said Benjamin Netanyahu wasn't going to win the Israeli prime minister president race. So, I think that pollsters can be wrong, and they particularly tend to be swayed by the media. And so I do think you should never trust them as gospel truth. I will say, though, on Donald Trump, the particular aspect of the media about him is that many in the mainstream media and network television and online have been trying to label him as racist since the very beginning. They pick on a few statements he said and characterize them as racist. That's the particular element that makes many people not want to be publicly supporting him, even if they don't agree that he's racist, and even if they think the media is being unfair to him. They just don't want to be painted with that brush. And so they won't say. Now, if there's a big enough number to overcome Hillary's lead in the polls, I don't know. But I think there are a lot of people who just aren't going to say it. And I think even some of the things he's saying directly in his campaign speeches, people agree with, but they know those are positions that are not politically correct, and they don't want to be publicly identified with them.
Jeremy, what do you think?
Well, I think there are a couple things to point out. Maybe there are these invisible voters out there, but I sure would be not wanting to run a campaign dependent upon voters who are invisible. I want to know who my voters are, and I want to go knock on their doors to make sure that they're excited about the candidate, because if they're excited about the candidate, what do? They talk about the candidate. When they talk about the candidate, they don't talk on Fox News about the candidate. They talk in the carpool line about the candidate, and they start convincing other people about the candidate as well, and they want to get them out there. And then they will be motivated to do something that's extremely important in politics. They will turn out to vote. If you're excited about somebody, you'll go out to vote. If you're really not excited, in fact, if you're a little embarrassed about the person, you may not even turn out to vote. And I think that's what probably
nobody will call you and remind you to turn out because you're not public.
Or worse, there may not even be a headquarters or a campaign apparatus in place in which to turn out the vote of your particular area. And I think we do see that kind of a problem right now. Donald Trump has managed to run a very asymmetrical campaign for the last however long.
That's a good way of describing it.
He seems to have been somewhat successful in that. Perhaps we'll still find out how he can be successful in the kind of the out of the mainstream way of the campaigns. But we do have a lesson of history that says that the person who wins the presidential election has one more vote than the other guy did.
Yeah.
And so you've got to have people go to the polls to actually vote on this. My concern for any candidate that has people that are described as invisible candidates is, do you have an ability to turn your invisible candidates into visible ones that will then, or your invisible voters into visible voters who will actually help others get to the polls as well? That's a big concern.
I couldn't agree more. And I also think that many people on the more conservative side of the aisle just are so concerned about the impact Hillary Clinton would have on America going forward, especially with her appointment of Supreme Court justices that could drastically change the track America's on, could change America for decades or even centuries. But the not Hillary vote doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to go ahead and vote for Donald Trump, and doesn't necessarily mean you just don't want to support Hillary, and that's not quite enough. So Donald Trump's job in the next, now it is 9 weeks, I think, 10 weeks, is to convince people that what he's actually standing for things. He's not just anyone but Hillary, but he's going to do some good things that they can believe in. He's got to keep working on that. And I agree. The weakness of just these hidden voters going to carry the day it's not a strategy. It's just maybe it's where they realistically are.
Perhaps.
I just wonder if it's a phenomenon. And yes, it's not a good one to rely on. That's for sure.
I do think it's also reflective of the fact that people are just simply tired of the election season. For goodness sakes, we've been at this now for what? 18 months, 2 years that we've been talking about 95 people running for president. I think the three of us were the only ones not running for president at one point. And now we're down to these two people. And I think there's just a bunch of us in the room that are still very polite, but would rather just say, really, this is the best we can get? Let's just get over this. Let's just get to November and get this over with. And so they're sick of the wall-to-wall coverage on whatever news channel that you subscribe to. They just want to get it over already and move on. I think there is some truth to that.
It used to be that people paid attention after Labor Day, and Labor Day is this coming Monday, and, people are already tired of it. So that's interesting. Debbie, you mentioned racism and people being afraid of being called racist for supporting Trump. And this McClatchy piece says, because critics see Trump as intolerant of Latinos, African Americans, and women, and he is portrayed as unpredictable, supporters are weary of letting friends and neighbors know they're behind him. And here's one lady, Alma Peters in Wake Forest. I want to put a bumper sticker on my car, but I'm afraid someone will do something to my car. I mean, I think that's a real fear.
I do think it is also. And, part of it, to be perfectly fair to everybody, Donald Trump could work on being more eloquent and precise in his speaking. I do not think, I think that the fact of the way he's lived his life, he's employed people of every ethnic and racial background. He's known for going on the work sites. He doesn't sit back in his Trump towers and hang out at his desk. He connects with the people who work for him. I think that he's gone out of his way to connect with Hispanic workers and black workers. And that's been his life story, but he speaks in a way that is ineloquent, is at least, and he doesn't, and I think he could change that even the next few weeks. How many black or Hispanic voters he could bring along, I don't know. But to begin to speak about the issues in a more positive messaging way would help a lot. He said a few things that made it easy for the media to pounce and paint him as a racist.
All right, we've got a bank of phones that's waiting to weigh in on this issue. Let's go to Margot in California listening in on KYCC. Hi, Margot. Thanks for calling.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my call.
What's your point? What are your thoughts on this hidden Trump voter issue?
I've thought about that for a long time now because I have family that is very liberal and I'm very conservative, and because I mentioned that I was going to vote for Donald Trump, it caused a family crisis, basically.
Really?
They consider that in my family that Donald Trump is a racist. I disagree with that, but my family thinks that he is really against the blacks and the Latinos, and I disagree with that. I think that he really cares about people, and I think he's only trying to run for our president because he thinks the country's going in the wrong direction.
So, did you just not mention it now?
Correct. And I agree with the caller before me that I didn't put a Trump bumper sticker on my car thinking somebody would vandalize my car.
Okay, interesting. All right, Debbie, what do you think of her family's statements and thoughts that he doesn't like blacks or he doesn't like Latino people? I mean, that's the way it comes off sometimes to some.
I do, and I understand. As I say, some things. In fact, the very beginning of Donald Trump's campaign, I think it was his actual announcement speech. He made reference to the insecure border, which is a true story, and made reference to people crossing. And he just essentially said, "And they are sending over murderers and rapists," which is a very poor choice of way to explain what he was thinking. I think with some voters, though, they started to recognize in Donald Trump, he's not a senatorial statesman. He's not going to be the guy who's just the silver-tongued, beautiful speaker. He is a, I grew up in New York. I can kind of half relate to how he talks, but I think that his manner of speaking is easy to make that conclusion, but I don't think it's true of him at all. And I think that, it's unfortunate as the campaign has gone forward, that has been the endless mantra of the left. He's racist, he's bigoted, and I think it would help him a lot to have outspoken, when I see the time, outspoken people who are supporters of his say so, who are of color.
Your calls after this. Stay with us. The Affordable Care Act, better known as Obamacare, keeps on offering us new surprises. Throughout the ACA that Congress passed in 2010 was language granting the Secretary of Health and Human Services discretion to formulate rules to implement the law. In the years since, HHS has rolled out one radical implementing measure after another. The department announced a doozy in May. This one forces doctors to perform gender transition surgeries on patients even if the doctor objects or sees such surgeries as physically and emotionally harmful. This is a new HHS mandate that expands the definition of sex under Obamacare to include gender identity. It adds transgender people to the list of protected classes that must be offered certain federally funded health benefits on an equal basis. HHS says that this means that a medical practice specializing in gynecological services who had previously declined to do hysterectomies on women presenting as men would have to, and I'm quoting the rule, revise its policy to provide the procedure for transgender individuals in the same manner it provides the procedure for other individuals. 5 states plus a group of religiously affiliated hospitals and physicians are suing the Obama administration over this mandate. They argue first that the administration did not follow standard rulemaking procedures in issuing the mandate. Secondly, they contend that the rule violates doctors' ability to exercise not only their best medical judgment, but also medical scruples inspired by their faith. In recent days, this same Let's hope and pray both of these decrees die swift and decisive deaths. Enforcing so-called transgender rights on doctors, schools, and the rest of the country, the administration relies on a narrative that gender identity is sort of baked in, and yet not necessarily the same as someone's biological sex. All society to accommodate this way of thinking. A blockbuster report has been released that gathers 200 peer-reviewed studies on this subject, and has the potential to poke lots of holes in that narrative. The report, published in the New Atlantis, is co-authored by 2 of the nation's leading scholars on mental health and sexuality. Among its conclusions, the belief that gender identity is an innate, biologically fixed human property independent of biological sex, so that a person might be a man trapped in a woman's body or a woman trapped in a man's body, is not supported by scientific evidence. The timing of this report's release could not have been better for this case. We should undergird this in prayer and be grateful that the great Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is leading yet another lawsuit against Obamacare overreach. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View, and we are on presidential politics today. Debbie Georgatos, Jeremy Dyes is here, and Jeremy made the point about the infrastructure of a political campaign, and Trump does not really have, any admirable kind of infrastructure, anything built at this late date. And I did hear the chairman of the Republican National Committee speak about that issue. He is developed and built a relationship with Trump when it became clear that he would be the nominee. And to his credit, Reince Priebus has then, really jumped on board with it and tried to support with the resources of the Republican National Committee. He admitted to us this exact thing that Jeremy just said, that Donald Trump has just neglected that whole aspect of a campaign, and there isn't an infrastructure. And the Republican National Committee has actually spent millions of dollars since the last election, since 2012, in building that to have local and state presence, because we fell short in the Romney campaign. We fell very short.
Yeah, and we can analogize to something here from recent history. One of the points made in this article is that people answer the phone differently. If it's a live person, if it's an internet poll, or if it's an automated call. The ones that are faceless, meaning the internet and the automated call, people will answer more positively towards Trump. And the ones that are actually alive face-to-face, where they want to save their own face, they'll answer less. And so they actually demonstrate, hey, I'm actually more... That same thing happened less than a decade ago when all the campaigns for marriage amendments were going around. And people would answer differently based upon who called them. If it was a live person, they didn't want to feel like they were accused of being intolerant, and so they would go with a left message and say, no, I'm against the marriage amendment. I support same-sex marriage. But if it was an automated call, they'd go further to the right. And the polls would skew to the right and say, hey, well, that's the same thing we have here. Now, here's the difference, is that back then, the groups that were supportive of those constitutional marriage amendments in the states, they had a game plan. They had a ground game. And they were not willing to rest the whole thing on the fact that 75% of the people in the state of Mississippi valued the institution of marriage and wanted to amend their constitution in a like manner. They actually created a plan to motivate people to go to the polls so that people would go to the polls and vote the issue under their own constitution. That I don't see that same game plan here in Donald Trump's campaign. I see quite the opposite, kind of a reluctance to even talk about the issue. We're just going to go out and have a bunch of big rallies.
Like I'm kind of above it all.
Yeah, or I'm going to use the free advertising of Sean Hannity's show and whatever else to be able to get the message out here, because I'm just a really popular guy. Really popular guys are popular guys. They're all great. That doesn't get you 51% of the vote.
At the Electoral College at the end of the day. Yeah, I was going to say on this subject, I think that a lot of it with Donald Trump, and I wasn't a supporter of his throughout the primary, but I will certainly support him now. I think it's just ignorance in politics. If you have not ever been part of campaigns, and a lot of, people who make careers out of working one campaign after the next, they understand all the different facets, including the thing Jeremy was talking about, which is a really organized ground game. And if you don't have that, you're so far behind the eight ball. But it's going to be incumbent on everyone in various states around the country who either is motivated for not having Hillary or has gotten behind Donald Trump. You've got to almost replace that with activity by the county party. Every county in the country, I think, has a county Republican Party. The activists, the precinct chairs, they've got to take that place of what should be more in place, because that is the only vehicle I know of to get the ground game that should be there done by the people.
It's funny, one of the points of the article here is whether people would put a sign in their yard or a bumper sticker. I was down in Florida talking to a group of supporters of ours, and someone had mentioned that they were trying to get yard signs for Trump. And they'd gone down to the local, I think it was the local GOP establishment, perhaps, that they were going to, and they didn't have any signs. There's no signs to be had.
That's amazing.
And there are no bumper stickers. They didn't have anything, and they viewed it as they've sold out. Then they've sold out of the material. They've sold out of the material.
They
didn't actually.
Perhaps.
I think that's more likely the case, is that they never actually had it.
It's because I think the Trump campaign is charging for them. Sometimes when a campaign has a lot of money, which Trump does not have, relatively speaking, compared with Hillary, I think they're charging, and that makes all the difference in the world. I've given out lots of free yard signs. Once you say to somebody $10, it's like, well, yeah, I didn't really care that much anyway, and then they don't get it. So on the county party, not stocking them up because the campaign doesn't have any money. Doesn't have the money they need at this time to do that.
Back to the phones. Our number is 800-351-1212. Let's go to the state of Georgia. Larry is listening on WAGP. Hi, Larry.
Hi.
What's your comment?
I was listening to the part about the hidden voters for Donald Trump, and suddenly, it occurred to me that, we've had so much coverage of the faults of Donald Trump, and if I was going to hide and because I was for somebody, it would be because I was for Hillary Clinton.
Hillary could have hidden voters too.
Well, that's what I'm thinking is, I would not come out publicly and say I was for someone who had their own server, and what's the intentions of that. And, you've got a person here that is probably, and excuse me, but they're at least, done some things that are very shady, and we could spend months just exploring some of her background stuff, and you would come out and say publicly, I'm for somebody like that. I wouldn't do it.
Interesting.
I think there is a big enthusiasm gap in this election cycle. Hillary Clinton has a lot of supporters. I don't have the numbers in front of me who will say, I don't trust her. I don't like her. I disapprove of her, but I'm going to vote for her. And I think it's either it's not just a straight Democrat kind of historical voter, but someone who's concerned about the image of Trump and thinking that what he may do may be worse. So they will say, yeah, I'm going to vote for someone I actually don't trust and think is dishonest. That's kind of breathtaking.
Let me go back to the beginning of this show today, when we noted that I was sitting in the van with my mom listening to the show. And what I was learning at that time, part of what I was learning at that time was learning how to decipher and discern the news media. And that's what Point of View has stood for so many years, right? Teaching you how to think through the issues of the day. And not only that, but how they're... So this is a very good lesson for us to learn here as we look through things. I noticed in the story that you linked to at pointofview.net, Penna, about these hidden voters, Kellyanne Conway, the spokesperson for the campaign manager now for Trump's campaign, is talking about these invisible voters of Trump, and she says we call them undercover voters. Now, and that's a really nice piece of showmanship to be able to explain in a kind of a cool way who you are. And she goes on to say it's a combination of things. Some are just tired of arguing with family, friends, and colleagues in their larger social circle. That may be very well true. And we just heard, was it Margot a few minutes ago, say that very thing. Now, listeners, what you need to understand is that the Trump campaign knows exactly how to talk to you. And maybe that's a good thing. They're actually finding and identifying a way to be able to speak to you, but they're trying to be persuasive to you. So and look, the Hillary campaign does the same thing, and how they will affect a persuasive message from their electorate as well. That's how you're supposed to do it. But just be wise consumers of this media as you're taking it all in here to say, I'm trying to be persuaded by something here. Look, they found a way to be able to persuade me because I don't want to talk about this at Thanksgiving dinner.
Wow.
See, I tell you, that time I spent sitting in the van with Mom listening to the show paid off.
Absolutely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're coming up on a sort of a long break, and we've got lots of you holding on. And I ask that you would hold on if you can throughout the break, or call us back right afterwards, because we want to continue this conversation. It's interesting to hear what, and you're really sort of supporting some of the things that people in this article are describing, the ways they feel. So we'd love to hear what you feel. We're going to add an issue to the mix, and it's one that's related, because this week Donald Trump, of course, went to Mexico, met with the president, came back and made a speech about immigration, which has been probably his, perhaps the issue that has drawn the most people through the primaries. We thought he was backtracking on some things. Some people are saying that this week he actually moved back and doubled down on the issues that have brought him to where he is. So we're going to kind of unpack that in the second hour of Point of View, along with all these calls about the secret Trump voters. So we'll do all of that right after this. Meanwhile, go to pointofview.net.
Hank Aaron and Tony Gwynn. Even if you're not a big baseball fan, there's a chance that you've heard each of those names. Hammer and Hank hit 755 home runs. Gwynn, a contact hitter, better known for singles and doubles than the big bomb. But both men are in the Hall of Fame, and any team would have been glad to have them. Point of View needs a team of partners, including both Aaron's and Gwynn's. Are you a home run giver, or can you contribute a single? If you and every listener this week gave just $5 today, we could pay our program costs for about the next 3 years. 3 years, just $5. Step up to the plate today. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Do your part, $5. Support the winning team at Point of View. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for sticking with us for the second hour of Point of View. It's Friday, it's weekend edition. Jeremy Dyes and Debbie Georgatos are here in studio with me, and we are talking about presidential politics. And this was an immigration week for Donald Trump. And a lot of people are saying, wow, they were invited, both candidates, by the president of Mexico to go speak with him. And Donald Trump went and Hillary Clinton didn't go. And that was number one. That was, he sort of won on that just by going. And he did look presidential going. But there's a lot that happened. And, more than any other issue, as we said before the break, this issue of immigration has defined Donald Trump's campaign. And he's some people say that he's flipped and flopped back on his position on basically what do you do with the people who are here illegally, mostly on that issue. And his supporters were ruffled up a bit, and some of them may still be ruffled up, others are not. And then some people stick with him no matter what he says or does. There's many that do. And so there was an article in the Washington Post, and the title of it is How Trump Got from Point A to Point B on Immigration and then back to Point A. And so, perhaps he's done that, and perhaps he's moved a little bit or left his options open. But what we do need to do, I think, Jeremy and Debbie, is talk about what he said this week, what he did in Mexico, and also what he said in Arizona when he made a speech on immigration. This was a speech that was canceled before, when he was sort of making some waves on it. It was thought through, I think, again, before the speech was made. So what will he do on immigration? At least what is he saying he will do? Will he really be able to do it? Because this 11 to 20 million that are here illegally, that's the biggest problem. He's going to build a wall, he says. He says no matter what the president of Mexico says, that country will pay for the wall. We'll see. He's going to in-catch and release. He's going to have zero tolerance for criminals. He'll be deporting anyone has participated in any kind of criminal activity. He will block funding for sanctuary cities. He will cancel all of President Obama's executive orders. He will abolish the DREAM Act. He won't pay for any kind of education, college education for illegals, and on and on. Very, very strong. And this appeals to a lot of people. What do you think he will ultimately do with the 11 to 20 million who are here, some for many years?
I think that is a big question. To the point you made a moment ago, Penna, about why it seemed last week that Donald Trump had wavered and stepped back a little bit from his stronger positions on immigration, he's running into the reality that politicians on both sides of the aisle run into in Washington, which is, it's great to talk tough, but then you start to connect with real people who look you in the face and say, but we've been here 3 generations and my kids are really stellar and they do great things. And so he struggled with that. What I think the answer is going to be with him is if we really get a secure border, whether it's a combination of wall and other means of having the border secure, and he said he's going to concentrate the work of this deportation force on criminal aliens, so remove people with a criminal record, then you're with this, whatever the number really is of people who are legally here. I think the things that he said that also will impact how many of them stay here. He talked about this, and I'm going to get the right words. He talked about turning off the jobs and benefits magnet. Now, that's been the hardest thing for anyone to do because you can't just do it from Washington. You have state agencies providing aid, but to the extent you can through federal policy, laws or regulations or funding, simply stop the availability of at least welfare programs paid for by the federal government, you are going to have a self-selection. People, if they can't get work, if they really have the employer E-Verify working, if they really have no access to free benefits, you will find people, at least ones who just come across the border and can go back across the border. I think you'll find those people leaving on their own. And so I think that's going to be a big change. I think also in the sanctuary city thing, I think if he actually can effectuate discontinuing the existence of sanctuary cities by cutting funding, my point is, I think things he proposed. If they're not a criminal problem, I doubt he's going to spend any time chasing down law-abiding people. But the other, I thought one of the most important sentences.
But he can't say it now.
He won't say it now. But one of the most important sentences he said was, "You cannot obtain legal status or become a citizen of the U.S. by illegally entering our country." So if you really hold to that, you say, well, you have some status, we're not going to round you up and send you home, but you don't have a legal status. Because for me, the entire immigration issue comes down to, can these people who entered illegally vote? That's the bottom line. Because this is the entire reason liberals try to increase the population of illegals in this country, because they think they will vote for big government liberal policies.
Once they're citizens.
And so the idea of no legal status and no citizenship and you can't vote, I think that would change everything. But I think he's not going to round up people who aren't committing crime. I don't think.
Yeah, and I think he's got to find a way to distinguish between, and Hillary should do this as well. I don't think she's done a very good job at electorate and that sort of thing, and those who are fleeing the country because of persecution. Syrian refugees that are coming to the country here as people who are here to disrupt America or whatever it might be. No, their homes were being bombed out and their friends being beheaded in the streets because of ISIS radicals in the streets. They're trying to find a place to live for a little while here while their country gets rebuilt. And the reality to criticize Mrs. Clinton for a little while here, she just is completely ignorant of, or at least willingly ignorant of, the issues of Christian persecution around the world that is driving people away from Syria, from the radical Islamic state there in the country of Syria, the failed state of Syria now. In trying to find a place where they can land now. So there's a balance we have as Americans of saying, look, we're going to secure our borders to make sure that we're not put under an unnecessary threat of attack, but we're also very compassionate and kind people, and we recognize that our country was built by immigrants. There are very few of us who are here natively at the very beginning. We came here at some point. And so we're willing to take care of people that come to this country and do so through a legal and equitable means. We're not willing to allow people to come here and take advantage of things unnecessarily and illegally.
I would say on that, I know we only have a minute and a half till the break, but there are separate federal laws which relate to whether you come here as a refugee or truly fleeing persecution. That's one set of laws that has to be clarified, and I think they both could do a better job at that. But the refugee status, when you're fleeing persecution, is different from coming across the border, living here. And the refugee stuff, we have had many discussions on this show and other places about how, ISIS has promised, and they have succeeded in Germany in placing ISIS people with ISIS, warriors within the groups of refugees. So our job in America should be, kind and generous as we want to be, is do the best job we can to make sure we're not bringing more San Bernardino killers here, more ISIS or ISIS people. Anyone who comes under the cloak of the refugee program and really means us harm. That's the number one job to me in the refugee program, is making sure we don't bring people here who mean us harm.
And I completely agree with that. And I think that Mr. Trump has found a way to start doing that, even as recently as this week. But at the same time, we need to be very mindful of not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, if you will, to make sure that we are providing the compassionate care and the refuge that these refugees need, recognizing that there are ways to do that correctly and do it temporarily so we protect our own national security, but also remind them that you need to go back home when it's time to go back home.
And I couldn't agree more, bringing the Christians here. Sorry.
800-351-1212. We'll talk about the makeup of these groups of refugees that are coming. That's a good point, Debbie, and we'll talk about it after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Student debt is a major problem today for the younger generation and has become a significant campaign issue. A recent op-ed by Susan Donarski at the New York Times changed my perspective on the issue of student debt. Let's consider the basic numbers. Politicians often cite two numbers, $1 trillion and $7 million. Student borrowers owe more than $1 trillion. 7 million of these borrowers are in default. So it is tempting to connect these two facts and conclude that more debt leads to more default. That is not the case. It turns out that the biggest borrowers tend to be those that are highest earners. Students with the smallest debts are the ones who actually have a bigger problem paying it back. For example, borrowing is the highest for people who go to graduate school. 40% of new loans go to graduate students, and those who graduate from medical school or law school generally have higher salaries and are therefore able to pay back their student loans. Their percentage of default is much lower than for other students who took out loans for college. Even college students do fairly well in repaying their loans. The typical college graduate earns tens of thousands of dollars more each year than the typical high school graduate. Their default percentage is relatively low as well. The highest percentage of student defaults are concentrated among the millions of students who go to college but drop out before they get a degree. They have smaller debts than many of the other students I've mentioned, but they also have the highest rates of default on student loans. You know, this is a policy application for these numbers. We shouldn't be trying to get all students to borrow less. Those going to graduate school or planning to graduate with a marketable degree are a much lower risk. And this is an important fact to keep in mind when politicians talk about student debt or even propose free tuition. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We're taking your calls here on Point of View, talking presidential politics and immigration. Let's go to Illinois and speak with Dan. Hi, Dan. You're on Point of View. Dan, are you there? You know what? You're not there because I didn't let you in. Hi, Dan. Thanks for calling.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I just wanted to let everyone know that, you know, this whole immigration thing, it's really not going to change anytime soon. I mean, you're always going to have people attempting to come in. You're going to have people attempting to go over the border. But I think what they could do is that they could get a whole national memorandum out there and say, okay, anybody who's illegal, declare yourself illegal and then go to school to become a citizen. You do not have to leave, but you have to go through the steps even though you're here. That would solve a great many difficulties, in my opinion. And as for the earlier question you had about
it sounds wonderful, but how do you make people go?
Pardon me, ma'am?
How do you make people go to this school? It's called assimilation. I mean, that would be what would occur. That would be the goal. But how do you make people that are already here go?
If they sign up, they have to go. If not, they have to leave. And it's their choice, not the government.
So again, the question is, how do you enforce that? How do you enforce that?
Well, then that's what you have the police and the NSA and the Border Patrol and everything else like that. I mean, that's their purview. Yeah, but if they're not willing to go to school to become a citizen, that's their choice that they're making. They're not being forced to leave. They're making the choice to do it.
Okay, so you're just talking about citizenship, really, because I mean, there are people here, and they could stay here forever, Debbie. and Jeremy. And, if they don't try to become citizens or they don't want to vote or care, I mean, we're not doing much about them. Yet, in many cases, we are sort of funding them through welfare benefits and health care and education and all those things. So, it's either, do we think it's important to do something about that or not?
Yes, I do. If they're not willing to go through the steps, then they don't get any help. They're on their own. It's just like having kids that are constantly rebelling against you, and I'm going to do it my way, to heck with you. When they get old enough and they leave, and they figure they own the world by the toe, so to speak, and then they find out it's not the way it was. Well, then they come to you for your help, and then you say, well, wait a minute here. I tried to help you, and you told me basically where to go. You're on your own until you decide to come back and do it my way.
Okay, so you're saying we ought to practice a little tough love. Thanks a lot. I appreciate your call, Dan. What do you guys think?
Thank you.
I have a problem with the idea of rewarding people who entered America illegally with a faster path to citizenship, whether they go to school or something else, than the people who stayed in their home country and followed the immigration law to become citizens. I think Donald Trump is right not to reward people who entered America illegally not with a faster track to citizenship. And I think it's really a country defining thing, because if we pursue that path, everyone who enters just gets a path to citizenship. We will continue the magnet of people coming to America. We can't bring everyone in America in the world who is impoverished or oppressed to America. We have to have a system in place. And so I also like Donald Trump's call for revision of the immigration system. And he talked about changing the priorities and who comes here. But the idea of letting people who enter illegally become citizens faster than the ones who comply with the law and followed our system, I think that's unwise.
Yeah, and the fact that it's going to take a long time to have this thing, what did he say, that these things are never going to really change anytime soon? Yeah, exactly. You're right. The 27th Amendment says that Congress cannot pay itself, give itself a raise. That was the original Second Amendment that was proposed in the Bill of Rights.
Wow.
It took 203 years for that to become the 27th Amendment. So, it's an interesting thought that it took us 203 years to tell Congress they can't give themselves more money. It's going to take us a while to figure out this immigration thing as well, but that's okay. We're allowed to do that. It takes time to get these things right.
I think the thing to do is to get it in steps too.
Yeah, so the first thing you got to do is protect us, right? Make sure things are safe, and then once we're safe, then we can figure out some of the smaller details.
Absolutely, enforcement first, and then perhaps you can look at making arrangements for those people that are here. But I agree with you, Debbie. To reward people who have not abided by the rules is it's just terrible for the morale of the people who have gone through all the hoops and others.
Yep. I also like one thing Donald Trump said in his speech, and I'm sounding like a big Trump supporter, which I have not been, but one good thing he talked about in his speech is re-engineering or thinking about immigration so that the immigration policy of America is designed to keep the balance in America, not have the immigration population increasing, the new immigrant population increasing at bigger rates than it has in the past, about the idea that our goals of the immigration system should be to complement our economy, complement our free market country, not take jobs away from people, but it's got to have a positive. He talked about bringing people here who are self-sufficient, who have skills, who can work, instead of bringing people here who just intend to come here and rely on the system. There was a very bad redoing of our immigration laws in Washington in federal government years ago in the 1960s, and it changed a lot of priorities about immigration. And I love his idea of a really big look again at what are the reasons for immigration, why people can come here, who do we permit to come here, and why. But you're right. I couldn't agree more, Penny. You got to secure the border first, and then you're going to start dealing with all the people who are here. And then you have to go be forward-looking, taking decades to happen, but change the laws with the right priorities in immigration and who can come here.
Really, immigration should be based on what benefits America.
Amen.
That ought to be the bottom line consideration for our immigration policy. But we're where we are, and some of it is hard to deal with. Jeremy?
What benefits America typically in our history has benefited the individual as well. That's the crazy thing, right? That's why we have the Lady of Liberty standing in New York Harbor saying, giving your tired, your hungry, your huddled masses, those yearning to be free. It's good for human beings to be in the country that is called the United States. Why? Because we recognize that we have a limited government that does not overstep its role, or at least in theory is supposed to be the case here, that we don't have a monarch imposing his will upon us. Instead, we have a guarantee of certain rights that we will possess, that we did not dispossess ourselves of to become citizens, that we recognize that at our creation, the Creator gave us certain inalienable rights that we will not give or lend at any time to a central government, recognizing still that we need a central government to do a certain amount of things we cannot do on our own. And so it's good for individuals to borrow from what you said, Penna, to have a good policy that benefits America as a whole, as a country.
We have a movement in America that's actually now permeates our White House and many of our national leaders and one of our presidential candidates that wants to go at the very core of what you have just described, that would ruin the foundation of this country, that would just ignore those principles, or, worse than that, fight against those of us who still stick to them. I mean, we really do have that. We've had a lot of progress made in that direction under Barack Obama. He said he would transform the country. He's doing it. And, another Hillary Clinton presidency will continue much of that. There's just so much entrenched now that's sort of striking an arrow and knives and cutting and marginalizing traditional values in Americans who have families even. And so it just becomes so important, and we have to go at it from every direction. Immigration is one of those.
That's right. So what this immigration debate is revealing about us is who we are as a country and what do we believe at a fundamental level. And do we believe that we are a country that has a limited government, that has a just role, but it is a role that is limited? Or do we believe that government is the purveyor of all of our rights, the giver of all of our rights? In that sense, is it itself God? And so these are metaphysical, kind of philosophical questions, but it's good for us to be having this debate because, as you say, there are some currently in power and others who want to be that would and have transformed our country into something that it was never designed to be. And so as a result, we are on the precipice of losing a significant amount of individual liberty such that we have actually fought a revolution for, and I pray we never will have to do so again.
Ladies and gentlemen, I do want to send you to pointofview.net, especially on this subject of immigration. We have put 2 articles up there, one sort of like a summary of 5 points that Donald Trump made this week, and another one of 10 out of the Wall Street Journal. So however much you want to read, those are both there. That's at pointofview.net. Also, everything that you really need with regard to this show is there, including old shows, archive shows from this week and all past shows. You can go in and find those. And the donate button is the thing I want to mention right now. It's up at the right-hand corner. And, as I've mentioned before, summer is just rough on ministries, and this one has been particularly rough. And so, the donations are down, and in order for us to continue to do things as, in the way that we do it and even try to improve, we just depend on you, our listeners, to help us do that. So we ask that you go to pointofview.net, really ask the Lord how deep to dig to help us out. There's a donate button at pointofview.net. We also have a call-in line where you can make a credit card donation, which is 347-5151. That's an 800 number. We'll be right back.
How long have you been listening to Point of View? If this is your first day or two, you get a pass. This one isn't for you. But if you've been around a while, I have a question. Have you ever donated to support what we do? If not, why not? Maybe you really don't know. You never seriously thought about it. Well, please think about it. In fact, take action. Do it now. If you keep coming back, you obviously get something from the program. You've heard how people's lives have been transformed and energized to make a difference. And the only way that we can be here tomorrow and next month and next year is if you break that cycle and give. Please, you can likely do more, but act today and give at least $5. $5. Sure, if you can do 50, do it. If you can do 100, do that. But at least 5. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And Debbie Georgatos and Jeremy Dyes. And speaking of the left, there's the latest hero of the left, this is what Gary Bauer calls him, is the quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers, Colin Kaepernick. Is that how you pronounce it, Jeremy?
Yes.
That's right.
And Debbie. And, you know, I'll just let you, Jeremy, talk about his antics, his activities this week. It wasn't just an antic that was very, very serious, what he has done. And, you know, I think that it says something about this effort to transform the country.
Yeah, look, if you don't know, then perhaps you need to come out from under that rock that you've been under and open up a computer and look at it here again. But Colin Kaepernick is a quarterback. He helped take the San Francisco 49ers to the Super Bowl a couple years back and suffered an injury, has been kind of a moderate quarterback since, and faces the prospect, based on his performance, of not even making the team this year. But because perhaps because he senses there's a dwindling of his career coming down the path, he has now decided to remain seated. Last night, he decided to take a knee instead of remain seated during the national anthem as his way of protesting sort of the Black Lives Matters world here, that police are inequitable, they're engaging in unjust behavior, and it's having an inequitable effect upon especially the minority population in this country. Now, it's
funny that an NFL player would do that.
It is very, very
a multimillionaire.
funny. Who is himself of a mixed race and adopted by a white family. So, I mean, it's interesting from a lot of different perspectives. But I have kind of a mixed feeling about Kaepernick because, on the one sense, as a First Amendment attorney, I'm really proud to see someone exercising their rights. At the same time, I'm a very proud American, and I guess maybe I value the rest of my rights as well to say I think he's being a moron. You know, he's got every right to say stupid things in this world. He doesn't have every right to have everybody agree with him on those points. What I would rather see from a guy like Kaepernick is, number one, excel at what you're good at, and that is football, and do your best to succeed in that. But what is he doing to kind of move the discussion forward? And I don't know everything that Kaepernick does in his life. I really, frankly, have not paid quite much attention to him until this week. But is he out there, building schools in inner city neighborhoods? Is he doing the Big Brother, Big Sisters programs? Is he taking a cue from his own adoptive parents and speaking into the lives of those who would face an uncertain future? What is he doing on an individual level to make this country a better thing? What is he doing to pull us forward to this thing that we're supposed to be united at in this country, this idea of freedom, and individual freedom at that? To throw a bunch of money at an issue and then to have a bunch of cameras pointed at you when you rest your backside on a seat during the national anthem that men and women in this country died for to protect, it has more of a selfish focus. It takes the eyes off of the country as a whole and even the problems that we face and puts it squarely upon you as more of a publicity stunt to help increase your chances of maintaining yourself on the sidelines that year or in the game better. And then it does to have an actual moving forward effect of creating a better hour and a better country.
The sad thing about it is this, for instance, he talked about the police, and he really demonizes the police in a sense, and the Black Lives Matter movement is really a movement of the left. Its roots are leftist. So when we talk about transforming the country, undermining the people who serve the country to keep us safe, to keep crime at a minimum and all of that, I mean, this was just a misguided stunt here. And I think most Americans see it that way, but it's just amazing to me that the NFL has not done more.
I was surprised, too, the NFL was as tolerant about his conduct as they were. I will say in the Black Lives Matter movement, it was interesting in the last couple of weeks. Probably our listeners know that George Soros, who is the founder of the Open Society Foundation and also a funder of left-wing causes, there was a hack into his emails, both his personal emails as well as Open Society Foundation's emails. And among the many gems that came out of it was that George Soros, is funding the Black Lives Matter movement. In fact, paid people to continue protesting policing in Ferguson long after the real outrage had ended.
Stirring the pot, continuing to stir the pot.
Yeah, and it's a stirring the pot, but I think in addition, it is a tactic of many in the American left to pit Americans against each other. It is to create a divided, angry American population. So many of his causes are like that. And so what's really bad about that is that there are isolated cases where police officers have engaged in excessive force, or perhaps police officers pull over black drivers more often than other drivers. Those realities we need to deal with as a country, as a culture and a society, and we need to care a lot about how police interact with citizens. On the other hand, the Black Lives Matter movement is built largely on lies. This notion, for example, that black citizens are unfairly targeted by police officers or treated unfairly, and the statistics. I didn't have Heather McDonald as an author of a book.
She was on the show recently.
Yeah, okay. So I've had her on my show too. Among the many statistics that came out, just share one that's stuck in my head. But a police officer in America is over 18 times more likely to be killed by a black citizen than a black citizen is to be killed by a police officer. The true statistics in crime are they don't hold up what the Black Lives Matter. They disprove everything the Black Lives Matter movement stands for, because the truth is police do not unfairly target black citizens in some systematic way, which is the claim of Black Lives Matter. But I love Jeremy's points a moment ago. I think that if Colin Kaepernick really wanted to help Black America, which would be a wonderful thing to do, there are many avenues open to be a positive influence, to be a role model, to encourage kids to stay in school, finish your high school, go to college, work hard in your sport, work hard at whatever it is your dream is. He could do a lot of positive, inspiring things. And instead, he's doing something that's just coming off very self-centered and honestly based on a
damaging. When you think of him as a role model, that's damaging to the culture as a whole.
Yeah, it's fomenting negative thoughts that are already there and kind of giving voice to that, rather than saying, no, here's who we should be as a country, and kind of moving in that positive direction. And I want to be clear, I'm kind of in support of
right
Kaepernick. Right, and even the guys that came out of the tunnel last year with the hands up, don't shoot, the St. Louis Rams did that last year during the game. Even as much as they both, Kaepernick and those players, they have convictions. Whether those are drawn out from a religious point of view or just a personal philosophical standpoint, I am all in favor of people having their convictions and living those out and doing so in a public way. And I did that with just blanked on his name, Tim Tebow as well. I want Tim Tebow to be able to Tebow in the end zone, or maybe even on the baseball field as he's trying out for the major leagues now. I want that right to be able to be out there, and I want my people that we represent across this country from a variety of different religions to be able to live out their convictions without being afraid of being punished by a government or by an employer for not believing in the way that I tell you ought to believe. I'm willing to have a variety of opinions, but at the same time, I don't expect my clients to be free of criticism as well. That's okay. We can disagree with each other in this country. That's fine, as long as we're allowed to debate the issue and arrive at ultimate
So
truth.
you think the NFL should, you're not critical of them like I am?
Not as critical as you are. And frankly, I've kind of given up on looking at the NFL because it's too boring to me. I like college football better than the NFL. But look, let them have their beliefs. This is good for us as a country to have these beliefs out there. It's good for me to sit down with my kids at the dinner table and say, "Hey guys, look what Kaepernick is doing. He's a bad quarterback, and B, he's being stupid. Don't you ever let me find you dishonoring the men who have served in the military, especially on a military service night like it was last night in San Diego." And sitting down on the ground while there are soldiers who have fought and bled to make sure you have the right to take that knee. Don't you ever disrespect those soldiers like that.
So it's rude, and we talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's it.
I will say that I love everything you just said, Jeremy and Penna. I'll add to that, though. There's something about we've lost in our society. Yes, everyone has the right and should express their views. They have the right to express their opinions that are unpopular or no one else thinks them. It's fine to say that. But in this particular example, with the NFL, and we talked earlier about institutions that don't stand up like schools, The NFL told the Dallas Cowboys that they could not have on their helmets some symbol of support for the police department. I don't know what it was, Blue Lives Matter or something, whatever it was. They said no to that. So that expression of First Amendment was not okay. We have too many institutions in our country surrendering to the left-wing view on everything, including the NFL. The Dallas Cowboys can't do that. But Kaepernick, and I realize they're not identical situations, but Kaepernick is being criticized. And the other point about it is, I would love if there was more voicing of truth. And that goes to this, whatever team it was that ran out doing hands up, don't shoot. As everyone who's studied the Ferguson situation knows, hands up, don't shoot never happened. Even the testimony before the grand jury, the final witness in that testimony of the grand jury was a black woman who saw the whole thing, who said, I don't like the police. I never talked to the police. I wouldn't have come here unless I was forced by subpoena. I saw the whole thing. That young man did not have his hands up. He was charging the officer after already having punched him. The officer had no choice but to shoot. And the reason I'm going through that story, which isn't really relevant to our discussion today, is we let false narratives take hold. Hands up, don't shoot is a massive lie. It's a false narrative, which if you read the entire grand jury testimony, as I have, it didn't happen. And so it's like letting someone continue to build up an argument about a complete myth.
We're taking your calls. Next up, Nettie in Missouri, who wants to talk about this very issue. We'll do that right after this. The Affordable Care Act, better known as Obamacare, keeps on offering us new surprises. Throughout the ACA that Congress passed in 2010 was language granting the Secretary of Health and Human Services discretion to formulate rules to implement the law. In the years since, HHS has rolled out one radical implementing measure after another. The department announced a doozy in May. This one forces doctors to perform gender transition surgeries on patients even if the doctor objects or sees such surgeries as physically and emotionally harmful. This is a new HHS mandate that expands the definition of sex under Obamacare to include gender identity. It adds transgender people to the list of protected classes that must be offered certain federally funded health benefits on an equal basis. HHS says that this means that a medical practice specializing in gynecological services who had previously declined to do hysterectomies on women presenting as men would have to, and I'm quoting the rule, revise its policy to provide the procedure for transgender individuals in the same manner it provides the procedure for other individuals. 5 states, plus a group of religiously affiliated hospitals and physicians, are suing the Obama administration over this mandate. They argue first that the administration did not follow standard rulemaking procedures in issuing the mandate. Secondly, they contend that the rule violates doctors' ability to exercise not only their best medical judgment, but also medical scruples inspired by their faith. The group filed their lawsuit in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas. In recent days, this same court temporarily blocked the Obama administration's transgender bathroom mandate. The administration cited that mandate when it issued this new one in May. Let's hope and pray both of these decrees die swift and decisive deaths. Enforcing so-called transgender rights on doctors, schools, and the rest of the country, the administration relies on a narrative that gender identity is sort of baked in, and yet not necessarily the same as someone's biological sex. All kinds of policies are being forced on the rest of society to accommodate this way of thinking. A blockbuster report has been released that gathers 200 peer-reviewed studies on this subject and has the potential to poke lots of holes in that narrative. The report, published in the New Atlantis, is co-authored by 2 of the nation's leading scholars on mental health and sexuality. Among its conclusions, the belief that gender identity is an innate, biologically fixed human property independent of biological sex, so that a person might be a man trapped in a woman's body or a woman trapped in a man's body, is not supported by scientific evidence. The timing of this report's release could not have been better for this case. We should undergird this in prayer and be grateful that the great Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is leading yet another lawsuit against Obamacare overreach. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We're taking your calls here in the final segment of our Friday weekend edition of Point of View. Debbie Georgatos and Jeremy Dizer in studio. Let's go now to Nettie, who's been waiting in Missouri, listening in on KNEO. Hi, Nettie.
Hi. Thanks for Point of View. I wonder if Donald Trump knows that a very damaging propaganda is going around among the black people in many states and even in churches. They are saying that they are going to vote for Hillary Clinton because if Donald Trump wins, that he will support the Ku Klux Klan. I don't believe that, but I think it would help if you would address that subject.
Yeah, it's hard to win on that one.
You know, I will quick say, I do Fox News radio political analysis all around the country all the time. And yesterday I was on a show someplace in Michigan, and the host was saying, well, about Donald Trump, but he basically said Trump was coming to speak to a bunch of pastors in Michigan. And he said, it's a complete waste of his time. They've all said, and these are black pastors, they've all said, I won't support Donald Trump because he is racist. This label of racism is thrown around. It is a malicious, ugly label. Every American shrinks back from it, but it has been successfully used in this campaign by Hillary Clinton, by the media, by the left, by the Democrats, casting anyone who won't agree with their policies as racist. And honestly, Donald Trump, it's sad but true. It's incumbent on conservatives who are always labeled a racist to speak up and more directly address it and use examples in their lives that disprove it.
Yeah, and it's an example of why you need to listen to Point of View and podcasts like the First Liberty Briefing so that you learn how to think through these issues and you're aware of them. Reductio ad Klanum is a bad argument. Even as despicable as the Klan actually is, but actually going to that level, it's not a thoughtful argument. It's one designed to evoke an emotional reaction out of you so that you'll have an intended effect. Don't be duped by those things. Think and learn well how to evaluate such arguments.
Speaking of doing positive things, I think before the end of the show, I really want to get to this call from Dave in Texas. He's listening in on KAVX, and Christians do have responsibilities to weigh into the culture, don't we, Dave?
Yes, we do. Jesus Christ said we're to be the salt and the light. And I brought up, I wish everybody would take the 30-day challenge and listen to your program. You have so much good information. God bless Louis Gohmert. He has quoted on a number of occasions 2 Chronicles chapter 7 verse 14, and I won't go into it, but you know what it says.
Yeah.
And he also said that if for no other reason, I'm like Debbie, Donald Trump was not my first, second, or third, or fourth choice. But I listened to all 70 minutes of what he did say. And his Supreme Court justices, that 11 justice list that he turned out, it had been vetted by a number of people that are way smarter than I am. And you folks said that if for no other reason, the Supreme Court justices are going to affect our grandchildren for generations to come. I brought that up in Sunday school. I go to Clawson Assembly of God Church, and our pastor is ticked at the Republicans. The reason why Donald Trump got into this thing is because he's not politically correct. And he's mad at these folks because, well, you didn't do anything about abortion. Well, only 17% of the folks voted for this current president, and they wouldn't vote for Romney. Well, the last time I checked, Romney
only 17% of the people in your church?
No, in the United States voted for this current president. I heard that fact from you folks on Point of View.
You mean for Trump? You mean for Trump as a?
No, not for Trump.
Okay.
For Barack Obama.
We'll get some stats, but that's not right. I know. But anyway, listen, I just wanted to get you in because Dave, you're speaking wisdom, and we really appreciate that and the encouragement for the believer to be involved, and especially in these days coming up to the election, for pastors to encourage that involvement.
What they've done is gone spiritual on this thing, and you know what it is? It's that 1954 Johnson Amendment. Yep. And Jeremy knows about that. And
Okay, I'm gonna let Jeremy just kind of sum it up real quick. Dave, thank you so much for bringing it up. We appreciate your call. And the Johnson Amendment. I mean, in a sense, it didn't really stop political speech, but the idea of it being repealed is probably going to encourage political speech, and so Trump is.
Look, it needs to go away, and it's a simple fix to be able to do so. And the president could actually help and encourage that removal of that process, and encourage the IRS to go look at more important things than what pastors are saying from their pulpits. And we want to provide as much freedom from that pulpit, regardless of what, if that's a pulpit or it's in your synagogue or elsewhere, to be able to speak your mind on what you believe, what your religion teaches, and how your people in your flock or in your congregation ought to be thinking through those issues as well. One other thing that I think that Dave brings out that is important to remember is that there are other races in this presidential election cycle. The presidency is one of three that were told to be co-equal branches of government. And now the presidency will have a major impact upon who sits on one of those branches. In the judiciary, that's very, very important. I can tell you as an attorney who deals with a lot of those judges, that's a very big concern. And so we put a lot more weight on the presidency, and well, we should. But there are still senators that have to be elected that will have the key vote as to whether or not they will confirm or they will reject the president's picks. There are congressmen who hold the purse strings to our government's money and how we spend our money and whether we should or we shouldn't. They also have oversight responsibility of how many different regulatory agencies that are out there. They have oversight over the president himself, as we remember from the Clinton administration and other administrations that have gone off the rails at times. There are state-level governors, delegates, state senators, state representatives. There are county commissions, city councils, and school boards. All of these are out there. They're on the ballot this year. If you don't care about the presidential race, or if you've got qualms about it, if you're a never whatever, it doesn't matter. Look for these other races as well. This is still a country that is going to be governed from a lot of different directions and will have a major impact. And the work that I do, the county commissions, the city councils, and the boards of education are the most critical to determining whether or not people are able to freely exercise their religion. I cannot tell you how many boards of educations simply cave whenever they get a nastygram from an organization that says you're not being nice to these people, to atheists and otherwise, and you're favoring religion over non-religion, blah, 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 blah. Get good boards of education people put on those. You go out and run for board of education if you can. But look, if you don't like what's going on between your choices of Hillary and Donald Trump, I'm with you. I get you. I understand it. Redouble your efforts on all the other races that are out there. Start locally, work outwards from there, but make sure that we have people that can hold people in check at the executive to make sure that they are running a limited government, and locally make sure that you're having people elected that are going to stay true to the Constitution as well.
Debbie, a quick comment.
Amen. I mean, honest, that's the biggest thing I think of the idea of this presidential election cycle. If you're frustrated and you want to stay home, it's the worst mistake ever. I don't even think you should decline to vote for the president, but everything Jeremy said, I just couldn't agree more. The decisions that really impact your lives, many decisions made at local levels, and a lot of people don't vote at local level because they think they don't understand. Well, then you got to figure out what's going on, and you need to understand, because that's who's going to change and impact your life in ways that you don't foresee. They're very important. So they all are. Get out there and vote.
Debbie, thanks for co-hosting today, and Jeremy also. It's first libertyinstitute.org and also America Can We Talk. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have a great weekend. I do want to thank Andrew and also Catherine and Shamila for their hard work today to make the show really pull it together. We've had a lot of topics today, and I want to send you to pointofview.net, not only for the articles and all the resources, but also the donate button. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.
Hank Aaron and Tony Gwynn. Even if you're not a big baseball fan, there's a chance that you've heard each of those names. Hammer and Hank hit 755 home runs. Gwynn, a contact hitter, better known for singles and doubles than the big bomb. But both men are in the Hall of Fame, and any team would have been glad to have them. Point of View needs a team of partners, including both Aarons and Gwynns. Are you a home run giver, or can you contribute a single? If you and every listener this week gave just $5 today, we could pay our program costs for about the next 3 years. 3 years, just $5. Step up to the plate today. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Do your part, $5. Support the winning team at Point of View. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.